Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Maine's Pine Tree Amendment and the National Movement for Constitutionally Protected Environmental Rights. Communities across the nation have long relied on federal and state legislation to fight for a cleaner environment and address the suffering caused by environmental degradation and climate change. Since 2013, when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court affirmed a constitutional right of people in the state to a clean and healthy environment, a national state-by-state movement has emerged, dedicated to securing constitutional rights to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Maya Van Rossum is with us today. She is the Delaware Riverkeeper and founder of Green Amendments for the Generations. She'll share her work to advance constitutionally protected environmental rights in 13 states. Maine is one of those states, and we are delighted to have State Senator Rick Bennett with us today to talk about the movement here in Maine. Senator Bennett co-sponsored LD 489, which would add the Pine Tree Amendment to Maine's Constitution. So he knows a little bit about what's going on here in the state. Welcome to both of you. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today. We'll hear from both of our speakers and then tackle questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait though. You can send questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you. I will keep track of those questions and ask them of our speakers at the end. We ask that you not message speakers directly, as we want their focus on the presentation, not the chat box. If you have any technical challenges today, you can message Will Sedlak and he will help you out. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you again for joining us. And Senator Bennett, I will turn it over to you to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. It's great to be on this Lunch and Learn with you and this all-star cast, not only of presenters, but also as I'm watching the names pop up on my screen here, great group of Maine citizens who are the people who move the world in Maine for the better. And I'm grateful to be here, and I'm really grateful to share the stage, if you will, with Maya Van Rossum, who is an extraordinary leader, as you will hear, nationally on, well, this topic as well as a lot of other environmental topics that, that are related. I also want to say a special shout out to Senator Chloe Maxman, who is the prime sponsor of this bill, and she's leaving the Senate after one term this year, and I'm sad to see that. Chloe and I worked together on this and many other issues, and like me, she's a bit independent-minded, and certainly, in my view, we can use more of that in the state Senate and in politics generally. But let me turn to the topic at hand. Most of you are familiar with LD 489, the Pine Tree Amendment. But let me just say, from my point of view, why this is important. The proposed amendment is predicated on the fact that a core condition of human life and a core to our own state's identity is a healthy environment and a clean outdoors. This amendment, this proposed amendment to the state's constitution, will hold our government accountable to protect these as basic rights for Mainers. The Pine Tree Amendment would be added to Article 1 of Maine's Constitution, which is the Declaration of Rights. This enumeration of rights, therefore, precedes the mechanisms and applications of governmental powers, the checks and balances, the legal definitions, which follow in Maine's Constitution. Indeed, the expression of these rights foremost in our founding document is designed as a limitation on the governmental power that is thereafter constructed. So I'm speaking about the construction of Maine's Constitution, and it's important to know where this provision fits. So most of the Constitution after Article 1 is about how government is structured and works. Article 1 is foundationally what government can't do and what it needs to look out for as it does the work for the Maine people. The Declaration of Rights are the bedrock principles and legal protections that you can expect if you live here in our glorious state of Maine. And I think the Pine Tree Amendment fits, as I suggested, comfortably and contentedly in that context. I mean, what commonality is more important for Mainers than our bountiful and beautiful outdoors? The clean winds of Katahdin, the lapping waves of Sebago, the bends of coastal shoreline. I mean, what says Maine more than cross-country skiing on a crisp March morning, or dipping your paddle in Chesuncook Lake, feeling the earth awaken around your tree stand in November, or traversing the boulders of Mahoosic Notch, or hearing the buoy bell at eventide? Our way of life in Maine demands recognition and protection as a right of the people. That's what we're talking about with the Pine Tree Amendment. It's our way of life. And sadly, our government has shown that it cannot always be trusted. Sometimes its policies are swayed unduly by centers of influence elsewhere, such as globe-straddling corporations that may think of Maine as a market, as a means to an end, rather than as the unique place it is, where there is a special interconnectedness between the people and the lands and waters in which we live, play, work, and find sustenance. Thus, the Pine Tree Amendment, in my view, is so important to help safeguard the harmonizing elements of our way of life, our shared values, and our common culture. I want to also just suggest that as we approach this, I've heard some concerns and some questions, and I think they need to be addressed head on. Maya will undoubtedly get into some of this, but as you heard from what I've said, this is not a check on you and your neighbor, what your neighbor can do, rights of private action that may ensue. The Pine Tree Amendment is a check on governmental power to make sure that government is working for us, the people of Maine, not neighbor-to-neighbor relations. This is not a new concept either nationally. Other states have adopted similar amendments. In fact, Montana and Pennsylvania have had similar amendments in place for 50 years or more. And Maya will undoubtedly talk about some of the experiences there. But the constitutional protection has not been used in nefarious ways. It's been used as I laid out at the opening. And it is, we can get into the details of how it would work legally, but I would encourage all of you to look to the experience of the other states. Hawaii is another. New York just enacted a similar provision. And this is something which, if it's right for Pennsylvania, right for Montana, right for Hawaii and New York, it certainly is right for Maine, where our outdoors and our way of life is so extremely and intrinsically embedded in who we are and what our state stands for. With that, I'm happy to answer your questions later, but now turn it over to Maya Van Rossum. Thank you.
Kathleen, were you going to jump in, or?
You can take it away, but I'll take this opportunity, since there's a little window, to say thank you so much, Senator Bennett. That was just a beautiful overview and really just such a powerful statement. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. I appreciate putting myself in there. So now we'll turn it over to you.
See, so that was perfect. So now I got this incredible break, right? Because the senator spoke with such beauty and eloquence, right? I feel like it's time for me to go away now. And you all are just firmly in support. You'll hear from Michelle about what you can do, and we'll all be golden. So, but thank you so much, Senator. That was really powerful, and it was beautiful and really just spot on. And I'm so grateful. And I'm grateful to be here with Maine conservation voters. I hear that this is the lunch and learn to be at if you really want to meet all the power brokers of the state, the grassroots activists, and the true leaders who care for the earth. So I'm really honored to be here. And I am thrilled to be joined by my partners in Maine, the actual leaders, Michelle Hankin and Andy Burt, who really are at the forefront of this movement in the state of Maine. So I will just quickly jump in. So you've heard a little bit about who I am. So I think the most important thing that I'd like people to know about me, just as I jump into my presentation about the Green Amendment movement, is just to know that I've been doing environmental activism and legal actions for 30 years now, 1 year shot. And so my founding of the Green Amendment movement and working in partnership with folks across the nation is really as an outgrowth of that 30 years of activism and legal action, and coming to understand how our system of laws in states across the US and at the federal level just have been fundamentally failing us when it comes to environmental protection. And so we truly do need a new pathway for protection. And that's really what we're here to talk about. But I cannot, you've heard from one of our powerful champions in the state of Maine, Senator Bennett, but we have, as he noted, we have 3 other really powerful champions. We have Michelle Hankin and Andy Burt. They are the individuals. It was actually Michelle who called me up 3 years ago now and said, hey, I think that this is a really great idea. What's happening in Maine? And I said, nothing yet. And she said, it is now. That's not really how the conversation quite went, but almost, because Michelle got right to work reaching out to partners and really starting what is now the Pine Tree Amendment. And of course, spoke with Senator Chloe Maxman, who immediately was on board to advance this idea. So you have some really powerful champions in the state of Maine advancing this powerful pathway for protection. This is what we're talking about. I always like to begin with the actual text so people know exactly what we are talking about. We are talking about adding to the Declaration of Rights of the Maine Constitution that the people of Maine have the right to a clean and healthy environment and to the preservation of the natural, cultural, and healthful qualities of the environment, that the state may not infringe upon these rights, and that the state shall conserve, protect, and maintain Maine's natural resources, including but not limited to its air, water, land, and ecosystems for the benefit of all the people, including generations to come. It is a very powerful statement, as the senator said. And it's powerful, not just in its rhetoric, it is legally powerful for the state of Maine. In fact, it is transformational, I would suggest to you. Now, often, right, when people hear about the Pine Tree Amendment in the state, they say, why do we need the Pine Tree Amendment? I mean, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of laws in the state of Maine, right? Laws and regulations, policies, programs, agencies that are all focused on environmental protection for the state. So why on earth do we want something new? Why do we need something new? How is there even possibly space for something new when it comes to environmental protection in Maine? Well, I would suggest to you that we need and we want something new because while there is this rich body of law, there are some fundamental underpinnings in how this law works, how governance works in Maine and here in the United States of America that really warrant this higher, most powerful protection. First off, the way the laws are written, the way government operates when it comes to environmental protection, it really is more focused on reviewing environmental pollution and degradation to come, and then literally legalizing it through permitting and other forms of management. The system of laws in the state is not fundamentally focused on prevention of pollution and degradation in the first place. In addition, there are a lot of gaps in the law, right? There are a lot of things that aren't regulated. And I know there's a lot of attention on PFAS. One of the reasons why PFAS has proliferated so vibrantly through Maine's ecosystems, drinking water supplies, farmlands, and that is happening across the nation, is because of a gap in the law. There are lots of gaps in the law that result in serious and significant harm, like PFAS. All too often, there's poor implementation, even when there are good laws on the books, right? At one point or another, depending on who's in office, depending what the financial resources of an agency are, there's poor implementation of even the laws that we do have on the books. Inevitably, at some point in our history, somebody gets into political office that doesn't appreciate the power and importance of environmental protection and works quickly to roll back the protections that are on the books. And unfortunately, environmental racism is just fundamentally built in to the way this system of laws operates. So communities of color, low-income communities, indigenous communities do consistently become targeted for pollution and degradation in Maine and across our nation. And so as a result, we have people that are drinking contaminated water and breathing contaminated air. We have people who are living next to toxic sites. We have ecosystems and species of all kinds that are being harmed from pollution and degradation. And of course, we're facing a climate crisis. So we can see whether we do an analysis of how the law works, or we look at what's actually happening on the ground. We can see that there is something missing in this body of law in the state of Maine, across the United States of America, when it comes to environmental protection. And I would suggest to you that, as you know, what we're all here to talk about today, what I would suggest to you that a very big part of that something missing is that we are failing to protect the rights of all people to clean water, clean air, and healthy environments. In the same most powerful way, we protect those other human, civil, and political rights that we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, the right to bear arms, all of which are protected much more powerfully than the right of people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. Now, when we look across the US, there are actually some limited pockets of exception when it comes to the powerful protections that come from raising up environmental rights, so they are protected as powerfully as those other fundamental rights. And one of those exceptions is actually the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1971, the state added to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution the right of all people to clean air, pure water, and a healthy environment, and recognized the duty of all government officials to protect the natural resources of the state for both present and future generations. 50 years ago. So you might be thinking to yourself, boy, 50 years ago, if this language is as powerful as you're suggesting it is, Maya, how come Pennsylvania's environment is not protected fundamentally better or more powerfully right now today than is happening in other states across the nation, right? If you've had this for 50 years, why do we have fracking in Pennsylvania? Why do we have pollution and degradation in the Commonwealth like we have in Maine, like we have in states across the nation? Well, there's an important piece to the Pennsylvania story, and that is that almost as soon as this powerful language was added to the Pennsylvania Constitution, people really, there were many who attempted to misuse it and really overreach in how they sought to use this newly minted constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And long story short, almost as soon as this language got added to the Constitution, there were decisions that came out of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that robbed it of its legal vibrancy and life, declared the language to be just a statement of policy and to not have the same force and effect as all of the other provisions found in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so that's the way things stood for 42 years in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There was, in fact, this powerful language on the books, but legally, nothing had changed for the people of Pennsylvania or for environmental protection in the state. It was during this 42 years that drilling and fracking for gas from shale came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, bringing with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations, bringing with it the devastation of the natural resources of the land and the landscapes, or deforestation, the filling of the wetlands, so much harm, land transformation that is necessary in order to advance fracking operations. The industry brought with it pollution of the rivers, the streams, the groundwater, even drinking water supplies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It brought with it the release of air pollutants of all kinds, including climate changing methane emissions. And it brought with it the proliferation of infrastructure, pipelines, compressor stations, LNG export facilities. And given the way the law stood at the time, it was really easy for the fracking industry to overwhelm Pennsylvania communities. Unfortunately for the industry themselves, they didn't think that it was easy enough. So they wanted to find a way to make it even easier for themselves to have their way with Pennsylvania's natural resources and Pennsylvania's communities. And so very literally, leaders from the fracking industry went behind closed doors and they wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. A piece of legislation that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislators in 2012 and came to be known as Act 13. It was passed by the legislators, signed by the governor, and again, came to be known as Act 13. And Act 13 was literally a gift basket to the industry. And of course it was, because the industry wrote it for themselves. Act 13 did a lot of bad things. But amongst the kinds of things that Act 13 did was it put in place automatic waivers from even minimal environmental protection standards. It preempted local zoning authority, mandating that drilling and fracking operations be allowed to happen in every part of every community across the Commonwealth, in the historic preservation districts, in the environmental protection zones, even in the heart of residential communities. Drilling and fracking operations, drilling and fracking well pads had to be allowed to be located as close as 300 feet from people's homes, from playgrounds, from schools, and more. The industry was given the power of eminent domain to allow the forced storage of their explosive gas under people's properties, and so much more. And so, given the current state of the law as it was, with Act 13 layered over top of it, while things were already bad for the people of Pennsylvania when it came to drilling and fracking for gas, things were about to get exponentially worse for the people and the natural resources of the state. The problem is, right, when you have, in Maine or in any state across the nation, when you have a law that's been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, there aren't too many options for the people to take on that law, right? So we didn't have many options before us in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We could have fought to try to get the law repealed or amended. That wasn't going to happen. The legislators had just passed it. We could try to elect better people to office so they could fix the law down the line. That would come too late. We could protest indignantly. That would be rich and rewarding and send a powerful message, but it wouldn't change anything. We could accept it and move on and try to focus on other issues. As somebody who's been fighting fracking for decades, I can tell you that wasn't going to happen, certainly not at my organization. We had to find a way to take on Act 13. And as we reflected, as I and my attorneys reflected about what could we do about this devastating law, we realized and recognized that we actually had something unique in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that didn't exist in states across the nation. We had that long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment, Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And we felt like this law was such an incredible overreach by the industry and their friends in the legislature that actually maybe we could overturn that 42 years of bad precedent and restore legal life to Article 1, Section 27. So we decided we were going to try it. And we challenged the law in the courts. Now, there were also 7 towns that were very upset about the fact that their local authority had been preempted, had been undermined, had been taken from them. And they wanted to challenge Act 13 as well. And they had their own set of legal arguments. But the argument, and we ended up joining forces, right? The argument that I, as the Delaware Riverkeeper and my Delaware Riverkeeper network brought to this joint venture was the argument that Article 1, Section 27 would violate that long ignored environmental rights amendment. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, very conservative Supreme Court led by a very conservative Chief Justice at the time. And in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory out of that Supreme Court with the plurality opinion actually written by that conservative Chief Justice. I just want you to read with me a few of the things in this incredibly powerful opinion that Chief Justice Ronald Castile wrote in December 2013. He wrote that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, the drilling and the fracking, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty. And that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact unconstitutional because they would violate the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so with that moment and with this victory, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13 before they were ever allowed to go into effect, preventing all of the ravaging harms that would have come had this law gone into effect. But in addition, in this moment, we also breathed legal life into that long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment and literally restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. It was a powerful victory and a powerful moment. Now, of course, in the wake of that victory, I and my organization and others in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had started to do the work of taking advantage, right, of this newly enlivened environmental rights amendment in very powerful ways, defining what it means to have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, and then defending that right. But as we were doing that work, I was thinking more and more and more about the power of what we had accomplished. And I had what I call now my epiphany, my Green Amendment epiphany. First off, I recognized that there was more in this victory than just for the people of Pennsylvania, that there was a message for all people in all communities across our nation. The message that our rights to a clean and healthy environment are worthy of Declaration of Rights recognition and protection, or Bill of Rights recognition of protection, depending on which state you're in. And that we needed communities across our nation to rise up together and seek and secure constitutional environmental rights amendment that would protect every aspect of the environment, like Pennsylvania's environmental rights amendment did and does. Now, one of the reasons why I came to the recognition that we needed communities and states across the nation to rise up together in this way was because I literally looked at every single state constitution across our nation. And I found that at the time of our victory in December of 2013, there was in fact only one other state, Montana, that had an environmental rights amendment of this kind. So there was Pennsylvania and Montana, and that was it. And we needed to change that here in the US. And the tide is turning since we started this Green Amendment movement. Last year, November of 2021, New York actually passed its own version of a constitutional Green Amendment, an amendment written differently than, but similar to the Pine Tree Amendment. Now, the thing is, if you want to raise up environmental rights to this highest constitutional standing, not just any language will do. And I think that one thing that speaks volumes to this point is the fact that pretty much every single state across our nation talks about the environment in their constitution. Some even talk about environmental rights, but only those three, Pennsylvania, Montana, and now New York, raise up environmental rights to that highest constitutional standing. It is only those 3 states that put environmental rights on par with those other human, civil, and political rights that we hold dear. There are right now, we just passed it in New York, but we have about a dozen other states right now that have green amendments, environmental rights amendments of this kind that have been put forth. They're all in different stages of the process, but there are 12 other states that have been inspired about the power of the protection that this kind of amendment can bring. And the Pine Tree Amendment, led by Senator Bennett and Senator Maxman, really is at the forefront of the national movement. So many people are looking to see what is happening here in the state of Maine with the Pine Tree Amendment, it being inspired by what is happening here in the state of Maine. Now, I want to talk really quickly about how things would change if the Pine Tree Amendment was passed in broad strokes, and then we're going to give some specifics. First and foremost, environmental rights are given that highest constitutional standing. We all know how powerfully the right to free speech, private property rights, even gun rights are protected in Maine and across our nation because they are recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights Declaration of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. Well, that same power now comes to bear for the environment. Government necessarily must refocus its work on preventing pollution and degradation in every aspect of its work. It can't hop to the end of the process and just think about how are we going to manage pollution and degradation through permitting and reviews. It's no longer just good enough to check the boxes and say, well, when I as a government official approved this highly polluting industrial operation, I complied with the statutes and the regulations on the books. I checked all the boxes. No, now you have to make sure that you are also protecting the environmental rights of the people of the state. All government officials become duty bound to focus on this prevention of pollution and degradation of harm at every level of the decision-making process, right? And, we know that there are so many steps in decision-making, ensuring that all government officials at every level of government, from the local town council to the state legislature to the governor's office, are thinking about environmental rights, provide the best opportunity for success when it comes to environmental protection, because we're taking care of it at every single stage of the process. Environmental justice is incredibly empowered because now all government officials at every level of government are constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomics. No longer can we have environmental sacrifice zones. And if you think that there's an environmental sacrifice zone that's emerging, then it is constitutionally infirm. And we have a new tool to help address that problem. It provides critical generational protection, which means we're going to get longer range, longer term thinking. There are so many ways that this is so powerfully important when it comes to environmental protection, not the least of which is in the climate crisis. The Pine Tree Amendment will provide a powerful foundation for good government officials who want to put in place better protections for the environment. It will also strengthen the way existing laws on the books are interpreted, because now every law, every regulation is going to be interpreted through the lens of how it can serve the goal of protecting the constitutional environmental rights of the people of the state of Maine. And as I said at the top, right, it will help fill the gaps. If at the time PFAS was coming to Maine, coming to states across our nation, when there were no regulations, there were no protections to prevent its proliferation from getting into the environment. If we had had constitutional amendments of this kind at this time in Maine and beyond, the people could have turned to the Constitution and their right to clean water and a healthy environment to get government to take action earlier, to prevent the proliferation of this dangerous man-made family of toxins, or to take action sooner to address the problem as it was emerging. We wouldn't have had to wait all these decades when so much harm had been done to so many aspects of our natural environment and to so many people, their health, their quality of life. The Pine Tree Amendment will provide powerful legacy, not just legacy protection, right? When we, in terms of natural resources protection, which of course is powerful legacy, right? Being able to hand down these beautiful, beautiful forests and natural landscapes from generation to generation. But it also provides legacy protection for the good legislation and good regulatory protections that have been put in place by proactive, forward-thinking, environmentally minded legislative bodies. Right. So now if an administrative agency, an administration came in later down the line, they couldn't so easily roll back the protections that were placed on the books by a previous administration. So this is powerful legacy protection from a legal enforcement perspective. The goal of the Pine Tree Amendment is going to be to get better decisions in the first place. But the reality of the Pine Tree Amendment is that when our government officials get it wrong, it will give people access to the courts to vindicate their constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. Now, this is not going to mean that we're going to have an onslaught of litigation, and we're certainly not going to have an onslaught of frivolous litigation, right? That does not have value. First off, when we looked at Pennsylvania and Montana, the two states that have had these kinds of amendments for a number of years, for Pennsylvania, we think about since 2013 and that landmark victory I talked about. For Montana, it has also been around for a while. We can see that first, there are 0 frivolous cases. No cases are being thrown out because they're frivolous, because these amendments are being used to address serious issues of environmental concern. And there is a high hurdle when it comes to bringing a constitutional case. So people don't do it lightly, and they certainly don't do it frivolously. When we average out the number of cases that make it to the courts in Pennsylvania and Montana, less than 10 cases a year, right, spanning the spectrum of environmental issues and environmental agencies. The Pine Tree Amendment, though, is not just going to be about the law and strengthening the law. It is also going to be about strengthening grassroots activism, right? And help activists and advocates and community members as they go forth to protect their environment, their natural resources, their health, their safety as it relates to the environment, because it changes the way people think. No longer is the environment something that we hope and wish our government officials will protect. We're happy when they make the right decision. Now our right to a clean and healthy environment is something that we are constitutionally entitled to. So it changes the way we intellectually and emotionally embrace our work of environmental advocacy and activism, right? We are now fighting for a constitutional right as well as a clean and healthy environment. Is it worth the effort? Absolutely. I told you about that piece of legislation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that would have had devastating consequences. We could not have prevented that devastating law put forth, frankly, by those bad actors in the legislature in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania if we had not had Article 1, Section 27. But it's not just in challenging legislation that we get the power and the benefit of this kind of amendment. When there are problematic permits, where the government has either failed to consider the environmental ramifications, the environmental justice ramifications, the applicable science of a decision that they're about to make, or when it is very clear based on scientific analysis that the outcome of issuing that permit is going to have devastating consequences for our environment, for our communities, for future generations, the Pine Tree Amendment can be used as a way to challenge that problematic permitting, to check it. In Pennsylvania and Montana, we've had permits defeated. They had to be pulled back and reconsidered because of constitutional environmental rights. So it becomes a powerful tool when there's problematic permitting. When there is a failure of government to act, to take on critical issues, like in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where there was a long ignored toxic site with a spreading pollution plume, where the government wasn't cleaning up the toxins, but instead was negotiating a deal with the developer to develop this site while it was still in its toxic condition. We have been able to rely on Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, Article 1, Section 27, to spur needed government action. The amendment can be used by government officials as a powerful way to protect themselves from allowing bad things to happen. Actually, in the state of Montana, the government relied on their environmental rights amendment to protect themselves from having to enforce a drinking water test well drilling obligation on private parties, because had that test well been forced to go in, it would have released a groundwater pollution plume that would have contaminated the entire drinking water supply of the town of Bozeman, Montana. And also in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we've been able to use the Green Amendment to spur Pennsylvania government officials to take needed action with regards to PFAS. Through both advocacy and the threat of litigation, we've spurred Pennsylvania government into action. And interestingly enough, when they started to act, they cited Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And it's also providing a powerful foundation for government officials, again, who do want to do it better, whether it's passing better legislation or passing better regulation, or even local government officials who are being faced with a challenging threat to the local environment. The Environmental Rights Amendment is providing a powerful foundation to allow them to say yes or no to critical things that are important for local environmental protection, such as in Marple Township, Delaware County, just outside of Philadelphia, where there was an old growth forest. It was like the last remaining natural landscape in this quickly urbanizing community. The township supervisors relied on the Pennsylvania Green Amendment, Article 1, Section 27, in saying no to a project that would have devastated this 200-acre old growth beech forest. Instead, it's now going to be preserved as natural public open space for the benefit of present and future generations in the township. And the Pennsylvania Attorney General routinely cites the Green Amendment when he's bringing critical enforcement actions in the state under Pennsylvania state law. So you can see there are a variety of ways that an amendment of this kind can be used. It can be used by people, by organizations, by municipal government officials, by state government officials, to ensure that we truly are protecting the environment for present and future generations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our main leader, Michelle Hankin, who really is, again, the mover and the shaker when it comes to the Pine Tree Amendment in the state of Maine. Michelle? I think you're on mute if you're speaking. Can we see Michelle? Is she off of mute?
We're working on it, Michelle. Hang on just a second.
Michelle, you should be all set. Try it.
Okay, super. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Maya, for that amazing presentation. And I want to also thank Senator Bennett and Senator Maxman for their amazing leadership. And I also want to thank my co-coordinator, Andy Burt. It's been a great campaign so far, and we're getting to the end of it. The House vote is scheduled for Tuesday. And because this is a constitutional amendment, there are legislators that still have questions. Understandably, this is a big deal. And as Maya has said, it can make a huge difference. So we need you to call your representatives to confirm their support, even if you think they're always voting yes for the environment. They may have questions and concerns, and we need to be able to address those concerns. So if I could have the next slide. On our website, which is pinetreeamendment.org, you can go to the Take Action tab and scroll down till you find district letters. And on that tab, you'll find this page, Find Your District. And if you go to that green button, it will take you to the contact information for your legislator. If you can give them a call and ask them to please support the amendment, they'll know that it has constituent support. And hopefully you'll be able to let us know if they are indeed already in support or if they have questions. If they have questions, it would be an immense help to us to know that, so that we can reach out and address them before the vote on Tuesday. I can have the next slide. Here's the contact information, our website, as well as the Green Amendments website, and our email. Either email us at pinetreeamendment@gmail.com, or you can call me, or you can call Andy to let us know what concerns your legislators might have. If they're in support, we'd love to know that too. That helps us a lot. And then if you have questions about the amendment, again, you can reach out to either of us. And Maya's also provided her phone number as well. We love sharing information about this amendment. It can provide, as Maya said, really transformational environmental protection here in Maine. And now make room for questions. Thank you so much.
What a phenomenal team of presenters that we've had today. Thank you, Senator Bennett. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Michelle. Your teamwork has really given us a window into the power of the Pine Tree Amendment and green amendments across the country. And I have to say, it's also completely unsurprising when we think about the incredible campaign that you all have built. I bet there's not a single person on this call who hasn't seen a Pine Tree Amendment sign in their community or letter to the editor in their local paper. You all have really outdone yourselves, and we're so grateful for your advocacy. For everyone who's joining us today, as always, you will get a follow-up email later this afternoon with some of those links that Michelle pointed out, as well as instructions for how you can call your lawmakers. This is a really cool thing. If you don't manage to make contact over the weekend, you can leave a message that will get delivered to your legislator right at their seat when they are getting ready to cast their votes on Tuesday. So look for that email later this afternoon, and it'll give you everything you need to take action. Let's tackle a couple of questions. Maya, will you just clarify again, how many other states have constitutional amendments like this in place, and how long have they been in place?
So Pennsylvania's was put in place in 1971, but it only got legal life in December of 2013. So it's almost as if Pennsylvania only got it then, right? Which is not that long ago. Montana, actually, theirs went into place in 1972. It wasn't really used until about 2000, 2001. There was a really powerful victory, a really powerful follow-up case. And then it sort of lay quiet for a while. And then again in 2019, we sort of started to see it picked up again and being used with new vibrancy. I like to think inspired by our work, but I can't take credit for that, for truth. And then in November of 2021, New York passed their environmental rights amendment. All three states have dramatically different language. There are now a dozen other states where there are green amendment proposals that have been put forth. Hawaii is one of them. Theirs actually hasn't passed yet. Sometimes though you'll read articles where there's reference to Hawaii, Illinois, or Massachusetts and other states because of language they have. I can assure you only 3 states have a constitutional green amendment. And if anybody is from another state, I'd be happy to talk with you why they are fundamentally different.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And is this something that we've seen in other countries, whether it's a constitutional amendment or some other sort of protection that rises to that same level?
So it's actually internationally, it's kind of similar to Pennsylvania. You have a lot of different countries with a lot of different language, but the way it actually plays out on the ground in reality, there are very few examples of true environmental rights being enforced and protected at this highest level. In very significant part, there's a lot of great language, but it doesn't result in the kind of enforceable protections we're looking for and talking about. Although there was a really powerful victory just a week or so ago in South Africa, which was quite amazing.
Really interesting. And this might actually be a question for the main team too, but is there a way to, do you have any thoughts about what kinds of suits we might see in Maine, or what kind of actions we might see in Maine if we had this amendment in place? So one of our participants today is wondering about the fish farm in Belfast, or about old messes that haven't been cleaned up, and does it take lawsuits to get that action happening? Is that sort of part of what we're thinking?
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Hard to forecast how such an amendment might be used. I hope the first way it's used is deterrence, to stop bad things from happening before they happen. That's the beauty of a protection like this, is that it is a shield, and people know you have the shield, and they're likely not to abuse it, because they know that there's consequences. I could see it prospectively used in a number of ways. As I suggested in my earlier comments, I'm really concerned about corporate capture of our government, and it rears its ugly head in many ways. And I think when government starts serving the purposes not of the people, but of special interest groups, that's when you're generally going to see it occur. There's been some speculation about how maybe our PFAS problem would have been mitigated if we'd had an amendment like this in place. And in fact, in 1999, the state knew of the toxics that were involved with PFAS. There was a record of it. They still pushed the spreading of sludge containing PFAS. It wasn't good testing. There wasn't, ample protections in place. I'm not accusing anybody of willful misdeeds, but I will say that I think greater care may have been taken in that whole ugly episode that's still unfolding with respect to PFAS contamination, which is costing hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly, it has uprooted so many lives of people in this precious state who have had, their families jeopardized, their businesses destroyed, their farms contaminated. And, if we can just stop one thing like that from happening with this protective amendment, it's the problem, right? When you have something bad that doesn't happen, you can never measure that. It's so important to get the systems right. And this is such a beautiful amendment to our Constitution that I'm sure will stop loads of bad things from happening.
Thank you. That's really, I'm sure everybody is aware of the PFAS issues that we're facing and just how deep they go. And yeah, if we could, now all we need to do is get the time turner, right? So we can go back and put this in place before all of that. But there are more problems ahead that we could hopefully head off. I appreciate that. Maya, I wonder, you mentioned some overreach in the early days of the Pennsylvania amendment. Is there anything that we should tuck away as lessons for Maine as we move forward and hopefully see our pine tree amendment added?
Superb question. So absolutely 100% big lesson, right? Is that it really is important once the Pine Tree Amendment is passed. One of the things that we will hope that the legal community in Maine pivots to do is to inform people about how to use it in advocacy and activism, as the senator said, to prevent bad things. But when there is the need for a legal challenge, really to be very mindful about the kind of challenge that you are bringing. In the law, for lawyers, there's a saying, bad facts make bad law. So it doesn't mean that it's frivolous. It might be earnest, it might be genuine, but you really need to, when you're first trying to develop what it means to have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment and to define that right, you really truly do need the judiciary to be able to understand the picture that you're painting for them. So it's just going to be making sure that those early cases, those early test cases are carefully chosen so that we really are clear that we have a very egregious situation, and the judges and the arguments are carefully crafted to make very clear about, as the senator said, this is a restraint on government action, it's a restraint against government overreach, and help the judges understand how to properly put it into play. I think turning to the various legal arguments that we've successfully been bringing forth in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will really help that. And that is another sort of support mechanism Green Amendments for the Generations would like to provide at that critical time when there are lawyers in Maine thinking about what is that test case. We hope that, you know, they get in touch and we can have a conversation about all of these good things so that they can make sure that it's the right first couple of cases to set that strong, clear precedent from the get-go. And we don't repeat the mistake of Pennsylvania.
It is such a pleasure and an honor to have you a little bit further ahead of us on this journey, Maya. We clearly have a lot that we can have already applied here in Maine, and we'll continue to learn and apply as we move forward. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your advocacy in Pennsylvania and far beyond. And Michelle and Andy, thank you for your work leading the Pine Tree Amendment campaign. It's really just been an incredible inspiration to see the grassroots support that you've built. And Senator Bennett, thank you for your sponsorship and your advocacy with your colleagues in the State House.
Thanks.
We are.
People need to hear from you all now. It's critical this weekend. The next 4 days are absolutely instrumental to the passage of this amendment. We're so close, so close.
And that's why you'll all get a follow-up this afternoon with phone numbers and websites and action alerts. And if you have any questions at all, please do reach out because we've got a wealth of expertise and knowledge and experience, and we're grateful to all of you. So thanks for joining us today. I hope that you'll all join us again next week for, you're going to love the title of our program next week. It's Agriculture and Climate Change, Cows, Corn, and Crap. And we will be joined by Peter Lenner, who's the Earth Justice's Director of Sustainable Food and Farming. He will walk us through some proven practices that can help make agriculture more climate resilient and also give us some tips on how we can advocate for them. So I hope to see you there. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and that your pleasure and enjoyment in the Maine's great outdoors inspires you to reach out to your lawmakers in support of the Pine Tree Amendment. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.